Cafe. Anyway, hey, welcome.
Mike's Daily Podcast.
To FF episode 2584, 2584, and Mike Matthews here at Cafe Anyway, somewhere in Podcastro Valley.
Mike's Daily Podcast.
And it's been an interesting day. We were having some rain, and then the wind, it blew over everything. And there is this, what the heck is this? Oh, this is something called a smartphone that I'm looking at. I'm trying to find a cool
Mike's Daily Podcast
picture, because we feature a podcast picture every FF episode, because
Mike's
Instagram
Daily
and
Podcast,
my website called MikesDailyPodcast.com. The last podcast picture was of me over there at Half Moon Bay and a beautiful sunset. Gosh, we have such great sunsets there at Half Moon Bay. It was called Speeches, the name of that, because I had, I guess I was doing some speeches during the podcast or talking about other people's speeches. I forget exactly. It seemed eons ago. Even though this podcast is daily, was it yesterday or the other day? The other day can refer to anything. It can refer to yesterday or to 20 years ago. And that was a thing we mentioned in the last podcast. But one thing that I mentioned that I did not mention in the last podcast, I did have an interesting couple of things thrown at me over the past day or so. Some interesting conversations. I talked to someone who is a pastor, and he was telling me about, he marries people and he buries people. How on earth, cradle to grave, every day, they deal with stuff. It's amazing, that profession. I've always been fascinated by pastors, priests, anybody in the world of the Bible and religion and churches and stuff. It's not an easy job. And I guess...
And here's today's podcast picture.
The podcast picture is of a cool shot I took over there at the top of Columbia in the area in Podcastro Valley. If you go up this one street, you end up in this housing development called Columbia, even though it doesn't really look like Columbia, the country. And then there's some beautiful views of the bay. And you can see the picture at MikesDailyPodcast.com. I find when I watch YouTube videos of people doing stuff behind the scenes. Oh, the late great Basil the Boxer. And he went with me many times to this place on top of this mountain that you can see at MikesDailyPodcast.com in Podcastro Valley. The Hollywood upsets me. It really gets me just... I don't get it. I really... The whole writers in general, I don't get. I thought at one point maybe I would be a writer, and I realized I don't have that talent. But I know there's this thing in Hollywood where I guess it only seems, even though there's a lot of voices in Hollywood, it seems like there's only one voice being heard over and over again. And you get the same formula and the same stuff from every TV show, every movie. I know I'm being a bit fatalistic here, but I saw a podcast channel, a YouTube channel, not to be confused with podcasts. Podcasts are different. You're listening to audio in a podcast. YouTube, they do channels. They do videos. No, not the same. People conflate the two. Is that the word I want to use? Conflate? Well, I'll just use it. Or inflate. One of those two words. Anyway, I'm not a big fan. And I think if you have dreams of moving to Hollywood and generating the same stuff that everybody else does in Hollywood, go for it. And I'm not your fan. I'm not your audience, probably. So it doesn't even matter, but I am not your fan. But you know what else? First Citizens Bank shares agreed to buy large parts of Silicon Valley Bank. And they got it for a discount of $16.5 billion. They got themselves a bank. I bought a bank. Yeah, and they got a discount. And it ended up saving maybe the rest of our economy doing that. Keeping the boat from tipping over. Meanwhile, Mark Wahlberg and Jim Carrey are rushing to sell their multi-million-dollar homes because there's a new mansion tax in Los Angeles that kicks off at the end of this week, this Saturday, April 1st, April Fool's Day. It's called Measure ULA, and it's trying to fund affordable housing projects. Homes sold between $5 million and $10 million will pay a 4% tax. Those selling homes over $10 million are going to pay a 5.5% tax. Elon Musk reportedly, and we mentioned this on the Sunday podcast, is offering Twitter employees stock grants, which ended up revealing that the company is worth about $20 billion, which is less than half of the $44 billion that Elon paid for just 5 months ago. And have you heard of Moore's Law? Is Moore's Law the one that like every few seconds, every bit of technology becomes completely outdated? Gordon Moore, he passed away at the age of 94. And that's sad. The observation that the number of transistors in a dense integrated circuit doubles every 2 years. It's an observation and projection of a historical trend. Rather than the law of physics, it's an empirical relationship linked to gains from experience in production. As we go outside a cafe anyway, where we bring you Mike's Daily Podcast, somewhere in Podcastro Valley, the last place on earth.
Anyway.
And yes, there's this other thing in our world. Perhaps you've heard of it, TikTok. Now there's a 90%. Not quite 95, but a 90% chance that it will be banned in the US. Yes, the chances have soared to 90% after the CEO gave evasive testimony to Congress last week. And so the Wedbush analyst Dan Ives said, nope, that was not done correctly. That testimony was poor, and thusly it is going to get banned. They didn't plead their case. So that is according to Wedbush Securities. They work with financial advisors and I guess they have won some awards. So there's that. It's a matter of when, not if, TikTok gets banned in the US, they said. There are growing concerns that TikTok is beholden to the Chinese government and could ultimately enable some form of spying on TikTok's user fan base of more than 150 million Americans. Bipartisan legislation, yes, bipartisan, in a world where that is not even a word that exists in this world. Not to inflate the situation. But bipartisan legislation is going through the Beltway that now lays the path for a ban. The ban could mean that TikTok will be granted a 3 to 6 month window to either go public via an IPO or sell itself to an American company. Interesting. So it will force them to be an IPO to go public or sell itself to an American company. Potential buyers include Microsoft, Apple, and Oracle. Winners could be Facebook's Instagram, also Snap, that does Snapchat, and Google's YouTube. Losers could be Apple, Nike, and Tesla, who all do business in China. Maybe they will be next on under the microscope from Washington, D.C. So now, I did not see John Wick 4, but apparently it got $73.5 million in box office sales on its opening weekend, which is a record for John Wick and is interesting in a post-pandemic world. I know a lot of people that still do not want to go back to see movies in movie theaters. Just in that cramped space with that many people, that freaks us out. Some of us out. Okay, it does freak me out. Not interested. But the movie industry has had huge success recently with Top Gun Maverick and Avatar The Way of Water. The box office is now a winner-take-all affair where the top film each week snaps up about half of the total weekly box office dollars during the year. At second place was Shazam! Fury of the Gods, featuring that guy that I knew from Ventura. I forget his name because he forgot my name. At one point, he knew who I was because he used to listen to me on the radio in Ventura. And then I run into him years later, and he's like, he just walked right past me. I'm like, no. Good luck. I hate Hollywood. Scream, is it 6? It came in at third place, and there's been a decline in box office numbers last year as releases dip below pandemic levels. Pushing out more movies is not the answer, as the problem is with demand rather than the supply of films. That's interesting. That's demand. People are not, as like I said, into it yet. So far this year, though, movie theater stocks have fared well. AMC Entertainment is about almost 10% up. And Cinemark Holdings has gained about 55%. Interesting. And thank you to Rob Black for that information. He does a financial podcast that I produce called Rob Black and Your Money. You can find it everywhere. Little plug for him. No slug, just a plug. Although there's lots of slugs walking around because of the rain. Outside a cafe anyway, somewhere in Podcastro Valley, the last place on earth. Look who is here. Hello, McMatthews. It's Chely Shoehart, gift craft supervisor. I heard myself on your last podcast, McMatthews. Yes, you were part of the segment Let's Go Back with Matthews. And it was a much earlier version of you, Chely Shoehart. Did you ever know that you're my hero? Oh, that's great, Mike Matthews. Do you want a snow globe?
The front panel will close automatically. Please remain seated.
Normal. Magnification.
Snow. I probably should have eaten a bunch of pasta before today's podcast. Otherwise, I'd be able to think of things, clever things, but that's not happening today. Look who else is here. Oh, Mike, this is Floyd the Floorman. And this is John Deere, the engineer. Mike, don't be so hard on yourself. Life has its ups and downs, and so do our biorhythms. Biorhythms, yes. That's right. That's what I want to put the blame on, is biorhythms. I was trying to explain this podcast to somebody today, and it was somebody in radio, and they were saying how they get some weird calls. People still call radio stations. And I said, that's good because nobody calls up my podcast. My podcast is 510-228-4640 is my phone number for my podcast. 510-228-4640. And she said that the people that call up and want to discuss things about what they like or don't like about the radio station. She said I couldn't get the guy off the phone. I go, that reminds me exactly of when I did radio in Ventura County on the country station. I was on every single night, weeknights, just about every single night, for 11 years on a country station. And there would be some interesting folks calling in. In fact, there's a little piece of that show that you can hear on the last podcast. I also put up a little clip on Twitter and Instagram saying, hey, does anybody remember the Santa Fe Cafe? And had a little clip of the Santa Fe Cafe. And the answer to that question was a resounding no. So it has been wiped from people's memories, which may or may not be a good thing. Because some of that was interesting, what I did on the air. And I put interesting in all kinds of air quotes. Air quotes, maybe something below air quotes, ground quotes, soil quotes. I put them so far up in the air, those air quotes, that you can't see them. They're stratosphere quotes. That's what I'm saying. Next show, it's going to be the wonderful Benita, the Disgruntled Fiddle Player, and the Brewmaster. And yes, you can call me 510-228-4640. Let me know what your podcasts are that you're listening to. I find that if I try and do a search and try and find some interesting new podcasts, all the podcast apps and websites, they all want to refer me to what's in the top 10 already. The Joe Rogans, the ESPN shows, the NPR shows, the other folks I can't think of right now, but, you know, the murder shows, the huge celebrities, the celebrity shows that everybody knows who they are type thing. Oh, hey, Dua Lipa did a podcast. Ooh. But I want to find somebody, I want to find an independent person like me doing a podcast. What's that about? Can I get that somewhere? So I search for that and I have a tough time finding it. So what is your way to find those? You can give me a call, 510-228-4640. And with more ways to reach me, it's A-Frame.
Mike's Daily Podcast is written and produced and performed by Mike Matthews. His podcast is super easy to find. Download or listen to his show and read his blog at MikesDailyPodcast.com. Email Mike now at MikesDailyPodcast@gmail.com. See you tomorrow. Bye!